But let's skip ahead a little bit now to kind of horizon scanning and looking at our hopes for the future. Eric, can you just kind of explain where data might come into PPPs and how that might help improving things moving forward? Is there a role for data in improving progress? Oh, sorry, I think you're still on mute there, Eric.
So the short answer is yes, and I think then I have to explain a little bit what I mean with that. So I think there's a role for clinical data that is collected over the course of clinical trials, and I think it's something that I think should become a standard practice also for the industry, is to donate the parts that are not drug specific from the clinical development to larger registries or to patient organizations, so that together with other data sets coming together, a much larger data set is being created. And once companies that I've worked for in the past made it a big point, because they also felt that the data was not the company. The data belonged to the patients. So the data needed to go where the patients were and needed to fulfill more than just for registration or for the clinical development, but also needed to contribute to advancing the care of patients. So I think that was what I also took from that. I think that for me, as of that moment, was like standard working practice. And I think also where public-private partnerships come into play is that when you have a drug product or medicinal product approved, if it's a new let's say new substance that doesn't have a lot of safety data around it, often you end up with a post-authorization safety study. And what we see, for instance, the European Medicines Agency do more and more is to not have industry-specific or disease-specific registries from the industry, but have those data collected via already present registries. I'm looking back at an experience that I had many years ago when we launched a drug for cystic fibrosis, inhaled antibiotic that had a safety signal in it that needed to be further investigated. And we found an excellent partner with the UKCF organization registry, where the data would be collected for the UK, because there was a larger population that was already enrolled in that registry. So it's also not only you contributing your data sets that you have collected to the publicly available data sets, but also on an ongoing basis contribute with, for instance, safety data into a registry, but also any real world evidence that you collect, please share that with already available registries to make the data more available to the general public. So I think that for me is, when you ask me about data, those are the first things that I think about.
Brilliant, thank you, Eric. And Sheila, we can't really ignore the disbanding of NHS England and a feeling very much of a shaky landscape around the world, really. What influence does this have on collaboration, co-creation, and these types of partnerships?
Well, as Nicola, as you know, with all of these changes, I mean, we've not just seen them here in the UK, we're seeing them quite heavily in the US. Individuals shall remain unnamed. But I think what that creates uncertainty. And when you're in an uncertain situation, I think people run back to their comfort zone. And I think what that will do in some situations is that will mean that there will be more what's the word I'm thinking of? More, not resistance isn't the word, but more thoughts going into whether or not this is going to be a good thing, and whether or not the new structures or approaches that are going to come into play by different governments, particularly here in terms of the Department of Health and Social Care, whether that will be an opportunity, or whether that will be, oh gosh, we're going to fall foul of some new policy that's going to come into play. So I think, unfortunately, what that does do is that creates an environment where people are less likely to want to collaborate because they don't know what they're entering into. Now, I always seem to think, and I always love the phrase, with every change brings opportunity. So what I would like to do is think about it on a more positive spin and say, well, actually, we should be thinking in this particular space is, how can we advise, inform, educate policymakers in making this environment much more collaborative, more co-creation opportunities? Because actually, if they did that, then they would actually see the benefits, not only for the kind of economy and sort of the things that they're trying to address, but actually across the whole ecosystem, as Nadia has kind of described. So actually, I think we should be thinking about, yes, change brings kind of uncertainty, but it also brings masses of opportunity. And how can we kind of really make sure that those opportunities are grabbed with both hands and developed? So I think we owe it to the community to try and think of those opportunities and push the policymakers to make them happen.
Well, and couldn't we all do with some optimism at the moment as well? Victoria, I know we've alluded to this a little bit in our previous conversations, but of course it doesn't always have to be financial in terms of these partnerships. Can you just kind of give an overview as to some of the other ways that industry and advocacy can work together in these mutual partnerships that maybe are outside a little bit financial?
So I haven't worked so much around industry and patient organizations collaborating together. It's been more the kind of academic research space a little bit. But I mean, I think, and there's a question in the chat as well about, the unprecedented funding shortages for patient organizations. And, we can think about activities which are more in the, less in the overtly financial space around, advocacy, different stakeholders coming together. We see this a lot in the European space with, policy activities where you have representatives of all the stakeholders, payers, patients, researchers, companies, policymakers, all coming and, either contributing to shaping new codes or recommendations. You can think about the sort of educational space. So I mean, my own personal message is if a patient organization is investing time and energy in something, in some sort of public-private activity, then it certainly shouldn't cost them. So there's the comment about how do we make sure it's not an additional drain. It's a balance between making sure that people are properly compensated for their time and energy, the same as anybody would be, but at the same time, not moving away from the tendency, and we certainly see this in the academic space sometimes, that industry is a cash cow. Yes, we know that companies have by and large far more significant financial resources than most of our stakeholder organizations, but actually it's very rare these days, I think, that companies can simply give away pots of funding, especially with very vague kind of goals. So we really try, through all the work that I do and Sheila in things like the Together for Rare Disease Consortium. I mean, we focus there on the ERNs, but the messages are really very applicable to anybody who's thinking of working with companies, and to the companies in the other direction, that you really do have to, have those early conversations and value each other's expertise. And companies, yes, they can provide funding for, specific things that need to happen across those whole range of activities we talked about earlier, lots of different things in that kind of building up the rare disease ecosystem and policy space. But they also have so much expertise in-house. If you're interested in registries and data, a lot of companies have years and years of experience in data science and data standards, and the really tricky things that, for example, I would not be able to advise somebody on doing. They obviously have tremendous skills and experience in drug development and around, engaging with HTA, health technology assessment, and all these different processes. So I think it's making sure that actually, you don't overlook the financial aspect, because people need to be properly and fairly, compensated for the work they're doing and the time they're giving, but also broadening out, especially in today's world where we know that some companies are moving away from rare. We know that in Europe our sort of competitiveness is a little bit, falling. So we do want to make de-risk working in this space for companies as well, but just make sure that we're all understanding each other's realities, and that people aren't losing out. And PPPs should never be seen as an extra burden, I think, whether it's for patient organizations or for academics. We need to make it as easy as possible for them to engage in that space, but also not view companies as the sort of holy grail solution to how do we get more funding into our organizations.
No, really important. Thank you. And just before I go on to the last question, just to say that Becky has dropped the guide from the ABPI for a few people were asking in the questions in the chat, so you can pick that up along with the guide to working with patient groups. Sarah, such a great conversation. I just want to come back to you to kind of wrap up. Obviously we've talked a lot there about, potential barriers, the sense of uncertainty, perception, and also lots of great opportunity there. From your perspective, what do you think needs to really happen to make sure that the future very much sees the continuation of these important partnerships and that they're fruitful for all?
So I think reflecting a lot on the discussions that have happened today as well, and one of the key things I now feel to take away is a sense of simplicity. I feel there's a need to try and provide some reassurance about what is possible in this space so that people can see that public-private partnerships have happened, they've had great outcomes, and here's our shared learnings and cases. I think it's interesting around policies and guidelines and templates. I think we need to be able to drive that in an easily digestible way for people to feel it's more pragmatic and an option and not seen as a barrier. So I think the first thing for me is trying to simplify and make it an easier conversation. The second thing I think we've all touched on is having a broader lens on what we mean by public-private partnerships. So there's a lot of expertise. We've talked about moving outside of our communities. We have to start thinking more about the holistic impact. So we should see them as, even if they are, say, a communications campaign around raising awareness of certain conditions, that's still an important part and an important project within the broader landscape of these partnership opportunities. And I think what my call and all I can take away from an industry perspective as well is thinking above brand. So in industry, we're very focused on commercially, we're launching a product, a solution into a market. And I think any of these public-private partnerships have to see a company in a corporate level, and not even that in a consortium level. So I think it's looking at how do we identify these partnerships as a collective group so that there's shared burden and shared responsibility, and a big word that everybody's used today, accountability, because we can't just start a relationship and then step away. So I think it's making sure that there is longevity to those partnerships and having that open mindset to the discussion. So, you know, we know that rare has been seen as small numbers, small circle, a small sphere of influence, even when it comes to the associations that are involved who shape the landscape. For the future of how we actually make organizational, institutional infrastructure change, we have to broaden that rare circle, and we have to get more people involved, more stakeholders, and a more transparent funding circle so that we can all do what we aspire to do in this space. So yeah, for me, it's everything touching on simplicity, sharing best practices, being open and transparent, and redefining what it means in the rare space. And just that shared accountability for long-term change.
That's a brilliant summary. And I think transparency for me really comes through as quite a key word. I think everybody's used that in one way, and really that and simplicity seems to be the heart of it. I mean, we really could have had another hour conversation here. I appreciate everyone trying to get us in. I think we've got a lot of questions, but I want to be really respectful of the panelists and the audience's time. So I think what we're going to do is we will put all of those questions to the panelists, but we'll do it offline. So everyone that's registered today, all of the responses to those questions will come to you via email. So they won't be left kind of floating out there. We will respond to all of them, but just to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll take that offline and send that all to you as an email. It's been such a great conversation. I've certainly learned a lot, and I think it's been really good to talk about particularly the barriers, because I think they can be a big point of frustration for lots of people, and that fear and uncertainty. So I think we've really unpicked quite a lot today there. So thank you so much. My sincere thanks to all of you for being so open and to really giving across your passion on the subject. It's been greatly appreciated. Big thank you, of course, to Sarah and her team at Havas Life London for bringing us today, helping bring today's conversation to you all. Just to say that the webinar will be available on demand. So if any of your colleagues, this would be beneficial to them, within a couple of weeks, it will be available to share in bite-sized videos, which you can find on our website. But also anyone registered will be sent the full video to watch on demand straight away afterwards as well. So thank you so much, everyone. And please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions afterwards or comments. When the exit slide comes up, there'll be some contact details there. And just thanks very much and have a great day, everyone.